So Joey Carbstrong dropped a documentary called Pignorant on Prime Video. If you don't know who he is, he's one of the most influential vegan activists around, and he does absolutely incredible work for animal liberation. So anyways, I wasn't sure if his documentary was gonna be like a Dominion or, one of those really hardcore slaughterhouse footage kind of documentaries. So I was curious to see what it would be like, and gotta support my boy Joey. But yeah, so I watched it and I wanted to share my thoughts with y'all. So the documentary starts by talking about Joey and his background, and his story is incredibly powerful. He's an ex-gang member turned vegan activist. Like, he got sent to jail, and it wasn't until he came out that he became vegan and then an activist. Yeah, so completely changed his ways. I mean, like, that's the kind of thing you see in the movies. But anyways, he talks about how pigs were his favorite animal growing up, hence the focus on the film. Pignorant. And so the film centers around showing us, the audience, the reality of what happens to pigs in the pork industry. And the way that he does it is by showing us interviews with experts, ex-slaughterhouse workers, and showing us his quest to infiltrate a slaughterhouse and get actual footage of what happens to pigs. And the overarching element of this documentary is his focus on the word humane and what that might mean to me and you versus what it actually means in the industry, and how industry abuses that difference in understanding to sell the public lies, essentially. So I think the documentary does a really good job of showing us that disconnect. Firstly, it talks about the most common way to kill pigs in the UK, US, Europe, and Australia is by gassing them. Yes, dude. And how that is what is sold as humane. And so people see gassing and they see humane and they think, oh, like, I guess they're just gently put to sleep by the gas. I don't know if it's the cognitive dissonance kicking in or people willfully making up a convenient narrative, because when I heard pigs are gassed, I did not think that they were gently put to sleep. But I've made videos about gassed pigs and the comments are a battlefield of, oh, it's a gentle death. But we know that that couldn't be farther from the truth, because they use CO2 gas, which is frankly one of the cruelest ways to kill anyone. And another big theme of the documentary is the faith that people seem to put in labels like Red Tractor Approved and RSPCA, which are basically labels that communicate, hey, we went and checked out these farms and they're good. And especially just based on the interviews that Joey did, it seems like the RSPCA has a really good reputation, especially in the UK, for all the work that they do with animals in general. And I think the statistic was something like 95% of the pork sold in the UK is Red Tractor approved. So it's basically this whole scheme to assure the public that they don't have to worry about the conditions of the animals that they're eating, which only makes the investigations that Joey does later on in the documentary even more shocking. And ultimately it comes back to these gas chambers. So this documentary really centers around that narrative and Joey's quest to get footage from inside of one. Also, can we just pause for a second? Like, damn, Joey, look at that drip. Like, you didn't have to go this hard. But anyways, another thing that the documentary does really well is making you realize how unethical it is to have people working in slaughterhouses, which I feel like is something that people don't discuss too often. He talks to experts talking about how nothing can prepare you for working in a slaughterhouse. Like, you might think, oh yeah, it's like a rough job. But the reality is that it's a job that involves so much death and violence and blood. It leads to higher levels of PTSD, depression, and other mental disorders for the people working there. And you know they aren't giving them good health insurance. And a lot of the times, the people working there are doing so out of necessity. Like, they need to pay the bills, and it's the only job they can get. So it's such a messed up situation. So like I mentioned, there's even a scene where he's interviewing an ex-slaughterhouse worker, and I don't want to spoil too much, but it's so ghastly the way that he describes his experience working there. So another thing that Pignorant does really well is it does a great job of making you understand the beauty of these animals. They talk about how smart pigs are and how they're able to solve complex puzzles. But even outside of intelligence, the way they communicate their emotions, the way they interact with one another. Like, there's this one scene where there's a sick pig and a bunch of other pigs gather around the sick pig to protect them. So it's such a gut punch when they build up how mentally advanced these animals are. And then they force this realization on you that these animals feel deep fear when they realize what's going to happen to them. And I'm not even doing it justice. Like, they do such a good job showing you with the visuals. You can see how afraid these pigs are. And one thing that really stuck with me is with one of the persons that they interviewed, and they were talking about how when pigs normally give birth, there's this whole nesting ritual, and they even gather materials for when they're gonna give birth, and other pigs can help them, and it's a really exciting time for them. But in the factories, they're forced into these really small cages where they can hardly even move. They're in their own filth, and it's depressing and frankly shameful that we do that to them. And what's worse, again, is that these are some of the smartest animals around. So she talks about the mental trauma that these pigs endure, knowing that over and over again they're going to have their babies taken away from them. And that scene also gives you mixed emotions, because in that scene he's with a mother pig and the piglets, and so he realizes he wants to rescue a piglet, and he does. And then of course they're social animals, so he decides, well, he needs to rescue another one too so that they have a companion. And then you see all the other really cute piglets around him, and it's sad knowing what's waiting for them, because even Joey acknowledges that he can't save them all. But then afterwards, in another scene where he's with the piglets, I felt really moved because now these pigs are gonna have full and loved lives. And they don't even realize it. Like, they don't even realize that they survived the gas chambers. I mean, yeah, you really got to see it. Like, I don't know, for me, it was a pretty moving scene. And so sort of what I've been leaning into, this documentary does a really good job of making you feel things. It does a good job of making you feel absolute disgust of what's happening to these pigs. There were times where I had to pause the video because it's hard to see the pigs' dangling bodies, for example. It does a good job of making you feel heartbreak as you see these workers roughly handle the lifeless bodies of these pigs. It makes you feel angry about how this can still be happening, how there are still people out there who continue to pay for this to happen, how people can choose to be willfully ignorant of what's happening. Like, one of the most unexpected scenes for me is where he goes to another farm and he finds this sick pig. You know, they can barely walk, and so he sets up this camera in the field. And he gets footage of the next morning where a guy comes up to the pig and bludgeons them to death. Like, it is some Game of Thrones shit. And the craziest part, right after that scene, they drop that the owner of that farm won like Farmer of the Year, including an award from the RSPCA. Anyways, so those are all things that the documentary does really well to build up to the climax, which is Joey breaking into the slaughterhouse to get the gas chamber footage. And I mean, obviously for us as viewers, it's one thing to watch it already knowing that he's gonna be successful, otherwise why would we be watching this documentary? But it is pretty insane what he pulls off. And he even mentions that so many things had to go right for this operation to work out. You know, it's like getting a Tinder date to actually meet with you. You have to have a decent profile, get the match, not get ghosted after the first message, not get ghosted after the second message. And so the thing that this documentary does that I've never seen another one do is that it's a documentary focused purely on the ethical side of veganism, and it delivers the brutal and honest reality of what happens to the animals, but it isn't so graphic that it scares the general public away. Like, it is tame compared to Dominions and Earthlings. I mean, there are strong and graphic scenes in it for sure, but it's not like just the constant carnage of other slaughterhouse documentaries. And having said that, I think it would be an extremely powerful documentary for someone who is not vegan to watch. Like, I've struggled to ever get someone to watch Earthlings or Dominion. Like, as soon as people know what it's gonna be about, absolutely not. Can't sit through that. Absolutely no way I'm watching that. But I feel like this is a documentary that would have the best chance of someone who is not vegan to sit through and absorb and think about the realities of animal agriculture. And another, I think, underrated element is that it's on a streaming platform like Prime Video. And according to Joey, now it's being organically recommended by the algorithm. So now you've got the reach of Prime Video as well as the credibility of being recommended by it. So yeah, I've never seen a documentary that focuses on the reality of slaughterhouses that is so accessible. One, because it's on one of the largest streaming platforms out there. And two, it's probably tame enough to garner a larger viewership. As far as I've seen anyways. If y'all know another documentary that's like that, leave it in the comments. But yeah, overall, I think this documentary is a big win, and I'd love to see this documentary reach a lot of people. So yeah, I would recommend giving it a watch, but more importantly, I definitely encourage you to recommend this to non-vegans in your life. And if you do, actually, let me know what they say in the comments as well. I'd be curious to see, because that's just my theory. I would be curious to see how non-vegans actually react to seeing it. Also, Natalie Fulton has also reviewed this movie, so make sure to check that one out too. Anyways, y'all, thanks so much for watching. I'll see y'all in the next one. Don't forget to take your B12 supplement and eat your legumes. And a big shout out to my patrons who help make videos like these possible.